Welcome back. I'm continuing to study my endgame tactics. Right now I'm working on king and pawn endgames, and I have a couple of positions here that I'm just trying to cement into my head, and maybe anyone watching who's at my level or lower could learn something from this. If you're rated higher and you've been through this 1,000 times, you already know the answers, so feel free to move on, or hang around and check me for mistakes. Alright, I'm looking at two positions and I'm going to shuttle back and forth between them so you can see the difference. The difference is that in one of these positions, the pawn is in front of the king, and in the other position, the king is in front of the pawn. Now, in both cases, it doesn't matter whose turn it is, but different things are true about them. In the one where the pawn is in front, what is true here is that black can force a draw. No matter whose turn it is, no matter who gets to play right now, black can force the draw. It's not automatically drawn. Black can mess up and let white win. And in the other one, white can force a win, no matter whose turn it is. But with the one with the king in front of this pawn, white forces the win with correct play. Then they can mess it up and draw. For example, they could wander their king away and let the opponent capture this pawn, and then it's insufficient material, so it's a draw. But white can force the win in this one. So let's just look at these just for a second. In this one, if it's black's move, the best move is to move up in front of this pawn. Because if black doesn't do that, we're going to end up with a version of the other position. Let's say black moves over here. Well, black has messed up because white is going to come around this way. And we're going to end up with a version of the other position where white can win this. And so if black comes back, we can advance the pawn, and now our pawn cuts off this square, and our king cuts off this square, and our pawn cuts off that square, and black's king has to get out of the way, and we're going to move up and promote. But that's because black messed up. And that's why this isn't automatically drawn, because if black plays this correctly, staying in front of the pawn whenever possible, they can force the draw. Now here, white only has two moves that make any sense at all. Obviously, white cannot move forward because black's king controls those squares. And if white moves backward, the opponent will capture the pawn. So we want to move left or right. If we move to one of these squares, black can just drop back, staying directly in front of the pawn. If we try to advance our king, they want to move their king directly in front of our king, again, where these three squares are blocked off by both kings. But now with white to move, white basically has to go back again. If white tries to advance the pawn, they want to get in front of it. And it looks very similar to the position that we saw where white was winning, but that's because it was black's turn. If it were black's turn right now, they can't go here or here, and they have to get out, and we move forward. But it's white's turn. So white can't go here because of their king. White has to either abandon the pawn entirely and let black capture it, or move here, but that's stalemate, because now black has no legal moves. The pawn cuts off these two squares, and our king cuts off these two squares. Well, and that one. So that's a stalemate. So this one, with the pawn in front, black can force the draw. The other one, the only difference with the king in front, white can force the win, no matter whose turn it is. But let's just say, well, again, it doesn't matter, but it's white's turn right now, and we can move to the left to the right. Now, we don't want to move back because we're going to end up with the other position, like this, for example. Now black can force the draw. So we don't want to do that. We want to go to one of these two squares. Obviously, we can't move forward because of the opposition, but if we move here, black has a choice. And it doesn't really matter which one they move to. If they move away to the opposite direction that we moved, well, we're going to move forward so that our king will guard the three squares that our pawn needs to move through to promote. If they move in front of us, we can move our pawn forward now. And if they move away, well, it's going to be all right. If they move to get back in front of the pawn, which is what they'll probably do, move the pawn forward again. Now, this looks very similar to the other position where black is forcing the draw, but in this case, it's black's turn. So black cannot move here and has to get out. Well, they can't move there either. So they get out, and then now we guard the squares that the pawn is going to need to promote on. And the reason that it's important, for me anyway, to know the difference between these two positions, sorry, get rid of that circle, is because during the course of a game, our pieces aren't automatically going to get to this position. Obviously, our kings start off here and here, and our pawns start off back here. That might not have even been the D pawn at the beginning of the game. It might have been a B pawn or a C pawn that captured to get over there. We don't know. But we do know that the pieces don't automatically start off in these positions. And at some point, that pawn's going to be back here, and our king is going to have castled, and so it's going to be over here, and their king's going to have castled. Then we got a bunch of other pieces on the board. And we trade, and we capture, and we move things around, and our king ends up having to capture something, and their king, as it gets toward the end game, starts moving toward the middle of the board. We can be conscious of the difference in these two positions, king in front versus pawn in front, before the king and pawn get there, is what I'm getting at. And that's one reason I wanted to study these. The one with the king in front, we can force the win, and the one with the pawn in front, black can force the draw. So if our king was back here castled somewhere, and toward the end game we start bringing it, and we also want to advance our only remaining pawn after, I don't know, we just traded off rooks or something, we want to be very conscious that when we get to these places that we want the king to be the one in front, so we can move it further first. And if their king is coming from here and we're coming from here, our pawn's back here, remember, we want to maneuver in such a way that our king gets in front of our pawn, so that no matter what they do, once we get up here, that our king will be in front. Because as their king gets forced back to try to stop promotion, once we get here, no matter whose turn it is, we can force the win. And obviously, if you're playing with the black pieces, and so the board would be flipped around the other direction, you want to end up in this position, if at all possible. So if possible, you want to use your king to get as close to here while white's king and pawn are moving forward, to be able to prevent their king from getting any closer to being able to get in front of the pawn. And again, knowing these positions, I think, will help me transition into the end game, knowing that if I'm playing with the white pieces, I definitely want to end up in this position. And if I'm playing with the black pieces, I want their king to be behind the pawn so I can force the draw. Well, thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something from this. If you want to set these positions up on the Lichess board editor, it's not very difficult. Just click clear the board and drag some pieces on there. You select whose turn it is. Click analysis board so you can play. And you'll find out, like, it took me a while to realize that really no matter what happens here, no matter what white does, they can't win. They can't get this pawn to promote unless black messes up. And the opposite being true here. No matter what black does, if white doesn't mess up, white's going to win this. Once you know that, like I'm pretty sure I know it now, it's going to help me set up the end game if the game starts heading in that direction. We'll see you next time.